Good evening, everyone. I am Audrey Zunkel DeCourcy, President of the League of Women Voters of Portland, and I am pleased to welcome you to our program tonight. What does Multnomah County do for you? If you live in Multnomah County, you pay taxes to fund county programs. You also vote for county leaders and for county charter reforms. You receive services from your county, from justice to public health, libraries, bridges, housing, behavioral health, animal control, elections, emergency response. Tonight, we'll be covering these three connections you have to your county through money, services, and governance. The League of Women Voters is dedicated to making democracy work, now more than ever. We believe that democracy functions best when voters are informed about issues and engaged in their communities. We present programs like this to give our members and neighbors an opportunity to dive deeper into important local issues. So after tonight, please tell your friends, colleagues, and family to watch the video or listen to the podcast of this program. Links to the recording will be posted on our website, LWVPDX.org, by next week. Our moderator for tonight's program is League Board Member Melanie Billings-Yunn. She will introduce each panelist as the evening progresses. I turn the program over to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Audrey. Multnomah County has been a persistent topic in the news lately, from its programs to its challenges to its taxes. But how much do we really know about what the county does and how it functions? How does it divide responsibilities with Portland and the other communities in its jurisdiction? What governs its decision-making? Who's running the show? Tonight, you will hear from an outstanding panel of current and former county leaders who will answer these questions, as well as those from the viewers in our live stream. We are deeply grateful to our panelists for joining us this evening to help us make sense of the news and the social, fiscal, and public safety issues that confront us daily. Each of our panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, then we'll open up for audience questions. We invite you to post questions in the Zoom chat at any time during the program. They'll be read out and answered as time allows. If your question is for a particular speaker, please note that in the chat. Now, it is my honor to introduce our panel. Our first speaker will be Dennis Therold, Interim Communication Director for Multnomah County. Dennis works closely with the County Election Division and the Joint Office of Homeless Services, among other assignments. Before joining the county in 2017, he worked in newspapers for nearly 17 years as a senior managing producer at the Oregonian and as news editor at the Portland Mercury, covering politics, education, homelessness, and police accountability issues. Dennis will give us a brief introduction to Multnomah County, its districts, and departmental structure and services. Welcome, Dennis. Next, we have former Multnomah County Commissioner Sushila Jayapal. Sushila is the first Indian American to hold a county elected office in Oregon. As county commissioner from 2019 to 23, she earned a reputation as a strong advocate for homeless services and for her work on clean air and domestic violence. Currently, in addition to policy consulting on strategic initiatives for creating a more just community and country, Sushila chairs a North Star Civic Foundation work group developing recommendations for Multnomah County's next charter review. Tonight, she'll talk to us about the county's legislative structure and how it interacts with the city and metro. Welcome, Sushila. Our third and final speaker is Jeff Renfro. As Multnomah County economist, Jeff is responsible for the economic analysis used to inform the Board of Commissioners' decision-making process and to help the public understand the county's work. This includes conducting and presenting economic forecasts for the county's general fund, the library district, and preschool for all. He works across departments and programs and helps to run the county's budget process. Jeff will speak to the issue on the top of all of your minds about how the county is funded. Values are assessed and monies are dispersed. Welcome, Jeff. Now, let's hear from our speakers, starting with Dennis, Interim Multnomah County Communication Director. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Melanie. Lovely to be here. I've always, you talked about my reporting days. Spent a lot of time with Debbie Iona in the police accountability spaces many years ago. So I've always appreciated League of Women Voters and how you all show up in so many different ways. Thank you. Let me share my slides. Thank you. So just want to start off with a little bit of basics about the county. So just these are the most fundamental numbers. How many people live here? What our geography is, how many cities we have. Our budget's $4 billion. That's actually almost double what it was 7, 8 years ago. COVID created and supportive housing services measure, preschool for all. These are all things that have added a lot to the budget. These other special levies. 30 plus clinics, 19 library branches. We've got about 5,800 employees. And we drive over, a handful of bridges that we know quite well, but we actually manage 26 bridges and a lot of roads in other parts of the county. Um, every day, as you're going to see, our 5,800 employees, they are working to make our community safer, our kids healthier, our neighbors healthier and more secure. But we have a lot of work to do together. More than a third of those 800,000 folks who live in Multnomah County struggle to meet their basic needs. And that really gets to some of the heart of what Multnomah County does, which is to serve as our community safety net. So here, this is just a quick list to see some of the services that Multnomah County provides. It's a huge range. It's infrastructure, it's justice, it's homeless services, it's libraries, it's recording vital records for people, it's keeping families stable and out of poverty, it's providing healthcare. There's so much. And this is an anodyne list, so I'm actually going to kind of go through and show you some of that work. We help people in a mental health crisis to receive treatment and recover. We help seniors and families stay in their homes. We help people with disabilities find jobs that they love. And we stand with survivors of domestic violence. We shelter and rehouse homeless adults and families. We help students get the immunizations they need to stay in school. We coordinate our community's response to health and weather emergencies. So this is, a lot of severe weather we've been having the last several years. The county's really stepped into that space. This is an example of that. We maintain the county's roads and bridges, and this is deliberately chosen. This is the Stark Street Bridge in East County. This is just to show the sort of the breadth of the work we do and where we reach. We administer the community correction system and we operate the jails. So that's some counties it's a little bit different. Sheriff's office might have community corrections, parole and probation with the jails. Here we have a Department of Community Justice that handles that. And I'll speak to more of that in a little bit. And most important, we invest and we partner with dozens of nonprofits. They all bring their passion, compassion, expertise to our shared work that's providing, health, housing for folks, case management, other kinds of services. And we all remain deeply committed to our values, including the belief that our community's diversity is its greatest strength. We are all committed to making sure Multnomah County is an inclusive place to live and one that is fair and more just for everyone. You can see here the various departments and divisions that make up county government. This is the place where all the work I just described is planned and delivered and sustained. So some departments include what can almost be considered their own mini departments. We call those divisions. And we have a suite of offices that aren't quite departments, but work on important things from equity policy to public safety policy, communications, where I sit, and emergency preparedness and sustainability. This is I kind of break this chart up. This is normally a vertical chart, but I put it this way. So you think about where the board sits with the sheriff, the DA, and the auditor. These are all independently elected folks in the chair. And then below the chair, as the chief executive of the county, that's where you see all the departments and all that work. And we're going to get into all those. Every department's going to get its own slide, and we'll talk about them. So we're starting with the health department. The health department serves everyone in our community, including and especially our most vulnerable populations. The health department oversees more than 30 health and dental clinics across the county. Health department does a lot more than that, though. There's a behavioral health division, there's a public health division, there's an environmental health division, there's a corrections health division, and there's a clinical health division. So you got people who, we help people who are recovering from mental illness and substance use disorder. Health department issues food handlers cards. Health department inspects and licenses restaurants and food carts. Health department also supports nutritional health for women and infants. Health also manages our county's new deflection center, which is something the legislature funded a few years ago to ensure that we are helping people with substance use not have to cycle through the criminal justice system. Health department also operates the Behavioral Health Resource Center downtown. That's something that the board approved when former Commissioner Jayapal was still on the board to get this building up and running to provide a respite and a shelter and some transitional housing for folks with mental illness who are downtown and helping those folks get services. Health also helps prevent overdoses, works on the fentanyl emergency. The health department also investigates communicable diseases and deaths. So the medical examiner's office is also, for instance, part of the health department. So this slide kind of gives you a sense of some of that space. It's a quite enormous body of work that the health department does. Next, I wanted to feature the Department of County Human Services. So this department provides services for families in poverty, homeless youth and families, survivors of domestic violence, seniors, adults with disabilities, veterans, and people with developmental disabilities. So another department that really is 4 or 5 departments almost put together into one. There's an aging and disability veteran services division. There's a division that works with folks who have intellectual disabilities, and youth and family services also. We also help this department also manages school-based services for children and families. It's really DCHS to me, that's the acronym. I'll try not to use acronyms, but the County Human Services really is an unsung backbone for our county's work. It helps to keep people from falling into homelessness, providing rent assistance, helps with utility bills to make sure people don't lose their housing, don't end up churning through our systems if they don't have to. We help people on the brink with this department. We also investigate elder abuse cases. We help veterans obtain benefits. We provide in-home case management, and we strive to do that with culturally specific services. So making sure providers are working with folks who they identify with and not dictating different kinds of systems and beliefs to folks, but really being there to amplify what works best for them. DCHS helps homeless clients who are older and have disabilities return to housing. That's been an expansion with the Supportive Housing Services measure. Things like our homelessness mobile intake team that's been on the news in the last couple of weeks to reach out to older folks who are homeless and make sure that they can get services in a dedicated way. DCHS also takes the lead in staffing and organizing our severe weather shelters. That's in partnership with Multnomah County Emergency Management, but DCHS folks are really the folks who are finding the locations every year, ensuring that we have people who are there to run these spaces and provide it. And then very important, we're going to talk about this later with Jeff, but DCHS now includes our preschool and early learning division. So that's where the Preschool for All programming lives. And that's been a new body of work that's grown significantly and will continue to grow in the next few years. And then we have the Multnomah County Library. Libraries are interesting because the funding is through a Multnomah County Library district that voters approved in 2012. So that changed sort of how all the local governments actually get tax revenue now. And I'm straying into Jeff's territory, so I'll stop there. But this is a great way to sort of show all the places that the library operates. We have 19 branches. Some of them we're rebuilding, brand new ones. Some of them we're refurbishing. So, not all of these are necessarily open right now, but in a few years they will be, and they'll be beautiful and welcoming spaces for people to go. The library provides so much more than books. The library provides education through weekly story times for children, provide language and work skills classes for immigrant communities. We have homework centers for students, free internet, free printing, and many other programs. And as I mentioned, the library bond that voters passed a few years ago have this system in the midst of a massive building boom. And we know that folks are going to have state-of-the-art facilities for years to come because of that, and we're really grateful for that work. So I went too fast. So then I have the Department of Community Justice. So this is our parole and probation system. This is the department that works with folks to make sure that we don't have people who get back into crime. We want to support victims and families. We want to interrupt cycles of violence, especially with young people, especially with families, to be there for them, provide services that might help someone not get back onto the streets in the way that they were. So we collaborate with a lot of other local jurisdictions in this department to protect public safety and strengthen communities. And you can see the 2 main divisions. There's an adult services division and there's a juvenile services division. They work really closely together to make sure that, again, folks do not end up having to go back into the justice system if they don't have to. We want to prevent that. And if we can help people from never getting there, that's even better. This department does run our juvenile detention facility. So that's not part of the sheriff's office. So that's one other special thing that they do that's separate from the work I'm talking about. And then now we're getting into some of the back office, I call them departments. So this is the Department of County Management. So this is where our chief operating officer lives. This is his space, but this is also where you'll find Jeff in the budget office. You have our central human resources. We have our division of assessment, recording, and taxation. And we've got our finance officer who's helping with the county's risk and investment policies. Probably you're not really, as a community member, going to interact much with this department in a direct way, except when maybe you go to pay your property taxes. So that's the first floor of the Multnomah building. There's a room off to the side. You have to get a ticket now. That's where you come and pay your taxes. That's where you get your marriage licenses. That's the other way you'll interact with this department. Used to do passports. That's something we don't do after some budget cuts in the spring this year. We lost some revenue, so that doesn't happen anymore. There's other places for that. But if you're looking for your birth records, you're looking for, again, we see a lot of couples getting married. It's actually quite a joyous thing in the Multnomah County building, this department. And it kind of balances out the property tax woes that people feel when they come in. They're not always so happy to do that. So it's kind of nice. There's a little bit of a yin and yang, and I appreciate that. Um, let's see. We've got our Department of Community Services. So this is another one. I think the name of this department undersells the work. It's kind of a mask. There's so much more that's happening behind the scenes here. So this is the public absolutely interacts with much of this department on a daily basis. So animal services, elections, land use planning, roads out in East County and Far West County, bridges, our surveyor's office, and our transportation planning. That's all part of this. So think about the Burnside, the Broadway, the Hawthorne, the Morrison, the Sovie Island, and the Selwood bridges. Those are absolutely this department's responsibility. There's 20 other bridges, the Stark Street Bridge, which I showed earlier, a lot of smaller bridges. We're out doing work on 220 something. They're everywhere out there. And probably if you voted, and I think most folks who are probably watching this are participants in our democracy this way, this is also community services, the elections division. Just presided over the first ranked choice voting contest in our local history. A lot of hard work that this division does, testing things, and I'm speaking with it because I'm pretty familiar. I had to watch some of that work. But if you've gotten a ballot, this is community services. If you have an animal, if you have a pet friend, 30,000 pets get licensed every year through animal services. More than 3,100 dogs last year got adopted, and 2,600 cats got adopted. So that's the other place people often see. We have a shelter out in Troutdale, and animal services has gone through some tumult in recent years. They're in a better place now. They've some audits and some work to create some better practices, some funding to hire more folks. And now the work is to identify a more permanent animal shelter that really meets the community's needs. That's the next frontier for that office. And again, but if you've got a pet, you've gone to the Troutdale shelter more than likely, and you've seen some of that work. And then this is another more back office one, the Department of County Assets. So you'll probably encounter, this is the least likely department that you will encounter as a community member. Unless you see a county vehicle out on the streets, or maybe if you go to our website, I guess technically you're interacting with this department. Technology and from IT, our vehicles, our internal record keeping, our business services, our fleet services. This is all the kind of work that they do. These folks keep the buildings. Multnomah County has 100+ buildings around the community. They keep the lights on, they keep the security going. They make sure that the buildings are heated right, that the workers are doing the right thing. So if you do need services, you come to the county building. These are the folks who are helping make sure that happens. And then we have our homeless services department. So this was not originally a department up until I think 2021. This was an office, one of those non-departmental offices. It was quite small, but as the work has grown, it was really important to make sure that this was seen as a full department. So this used to be the joint office of homeless services and started in 2016. I think before then, I think people forget, and it's good to remind people that in 2016 and earlier, we actually had the city of Portland playing a lead role in managing adult homeless services. The county instead worked with youths, families, single women, and domestic violence survivors. So there was really two systems that had to come together. And the city and county at that time came together, created that office, and made sure that we had one system holding all of that work, street outreach, shelter, which we now operate across several models and different types. We have case management, health services, workforce and employment programs, and we do rehousing work that ends people's homelessness. The journey for this department has been so many challenges. It's also been quite political, but in recent years, I think we've seen some real leaps and bounds from this department. Hundreds and hundreds of shelter beds have opened in the last few years. A really sustained focus on that, while also ensuring that we didn't stop rehousing thousands of people who were in shelters or even directly from the streets into apartments of their own, and then helping them stay there. That work is still going on. We have a new data dashboard. That's what this slide shows. And you can see from 2021 to July of this year, we have more than doubled the number of people who are enrolled in a shelter on a given night. month to month. It's a huge increase, and I think it's an undersold increase to some degree. And having dashboards like this, that's another thing that we've done more of with this department. And we've also gotten a handle on spending. There was a lot of money that came in through the supporting housing services measure that voters passed in 2020. It was hard to ramp that up. That was a huge influx of cash. And how do you spend that right? What's the best way to do it? We got there. In fact, we got there we did so well at catching up on the spending that we actually then had to figure out what to do when the property tax revenue, sorry, the tax revenues from the SHS measure, when those came in lower than Metro thought they were going to be, we had to make some cuts even because we'd spent our surplus finally after so many years. And then here we have the non-departmental offices that I mentioned earlier. So this is emergency management, the communications office where I sit. We've got our office sustainability, technically the county auditor, the board, the chair's office are all part of this, government relations, and office of community involvement. That's all here. Some of this work, it's important work, it's big work. It stretches across the county, but it's not something that's staffed to the level that a department is. But this is just a flavor of what some of that work is. And then I'll close with our other two elected offices. That the auditor, it's interesting, she sits within a non-departmental office, but we've got a different setup with our sheriff's office and our district attorney's office. So these are, report to independently elected folks. The sheriff wins her election, the DA wins his election. They do what they will. They run their department, their offices. It's their lane completely. The only wrinkle to that is the county board approves their budget. So how they spend their money, what they want to do with the money, that's up to them, how they want to set policy. But so they have to come before the board every year to get it for a budget presentation, and the board has to approve that. And there's always some wrangling there. Sheriff's office runs, we have 11,030, sorry, let me take that back again. 1,130 jail beds is our funded capacity. They manage those beds. They manage patrol functions across the county and unincorporated pockets in some other parts of downtown. They actually provide policing services for some of our East County cities through different contracts that they have. And they work with our health department to make sure that the jail is providing the right health care for folks there. And then the district attorney's office, they work with all the public safety partners we have, community justice, the sheriff's office, Portland Police Bureau, our other cities' police departments to charge and prosecute people who are arrested. And they also do some work to support proactive crime reduction. They support task force partnerships, for example, that focus on different kinds of crimes like retail and auto theft. So that's what I have. I'm eager for questions, and I hope this sort of provides a little bit of a grounding on the breadth. It's a lot of stuff, and I could have probably spent an hour on each of these every year. If folks want to tune into our budget process in the spring, there's probably 20 hours of work sessions where the departments, all of these come in sometimes by division, and they give a detailed presentation on what all the dollars are doing, what their outcomes were, what their plans are for the next year. So that's multco.us/budget, and I hope that makes it somewhere into the follow-up. If you really want to learn the county and you have time, that is an excellent season to be tuning into our work. And with that, I will pass it back to Melanie and the rest of the presenters today.
Thank you, Dennis. That was really an amazing list of things that you were able to share with us. I don't think most people understand that the county does as much as it does do. I'm now going to pass the dais over to Sushila Jayapal, the former county commissioner. Sushila, please take it from here.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you to you and the League for putting this on. Audrey in her introduction said that the League's work is making democracy work. I love that. Our role as participants in the democracy is to shape our governments, whether by electing our officials or by affecting policy or by changing our governments. And it's really hard to play that role to shape our governments if we don't understand them. So really appreciate that you're doing this. So before I dive in, let me say one other thing. As when Melanie invited us to participate in this, one of the things that she and I talked about, and by the way, she and I are working together on that other project she mentioned around Multnomah County's upcoming charter review process. We talked about the fact that people are much more familiar with their cities, and for our region in particular with the city of Portland than with the county. It's actually not surprising. And when I was a commissioner, when I talked to my counterparts, especially from large urbanized counties, They shared that experience that people know what their cities do, they're engaged with their cities, and they're much less familiar with their counties. And I think some of what Dennis shared with you is part of the explanation for that. The county's direct services really touch a subset of the population. It is the population that's underserved, it's folks in poverty, it's low-income folks. Cities, by contrast, directly serve a much larger subset of the population, right? We all drive or walk or bicycle on our roads. We all experience sewer services in some form or fashion. The infrastructure role that cities play mean that they touch people much more directly. So it's not surprising. And at the same time, it's something I think we need to change. So again, many thanks to the League. So I was asked to talk a little bit about governance structure. You know, Dennis talked about the what the county does. This is the who. A little bit of the how, but Jeff is really going to take over the more important part of the how, which is what are the resources that fuel the how. So here's a little bit of the who. I'm going to start with the governing documents that lay out the county structure. And by the way, all of this is pretty high level. You know, I do hope you'll ask questions if you have them. It's not possible to go into detail in this time. So the governing documents, we have a county charter. Essentially, a charter is like a constitution. So you can think of it as being very similar to the state constitution. You can think of it as being similar in the role that it plays to the federal constitution. And the idea is that it's a general document that sets out the powers and the responsibilities of any particular government. So examples of the things that are in the county charter, this isn't everything. These are some of the key things. The general powers, what does Multnomah County have the power to do? And the quote, I quote it, it has authority over matters of county concern. That's very broad. I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. So it sets out the general powers of the county. It sets out who our elected officials are. Dennis told you who they are, things like terms of office, term limits. It describes how elected officials are elected. Ranked choice voting was adopted by voters in 22, and the charter talks about ranked choice voting. It talks about campaign finance. So again, very broad parameters of what the county is authorized to do and who's authorized to do it. The other document is the next sort of level down in terms of detail is the county code. That's more like the legislation. So if you think about statutes at a state level or the federal level, the county code is the provisions that are enforceable by law. It's got detail on administrative structure and operations. It's got a list of county departments. And then the vast bulk of the county code is ordinances. That's outward facing legislation. So for example, we have a wood smoke ordinance that dictates when you're allowed to burn wood outside and when you're not. We have a flavored tobacco ban. That's an ordinance. It's outward facing legislation. It's got the force of law. All of those ordinances are in the county code. And then I won't talk about this next group much, but administrative rules, that really spells out in more detail the ordinances that are in the county code. It's much more about what's the hearings procedure, you know, what's your right of appeal, those sorts of things. And then finally, board resolutions. Resolutions are not law. They are a statement of intent or policy by the Board of Commissioners. And so often what you'll see is the Board of Commissioners passing a resolution that's a general statement of intent and then enacting an ordinance to actually implement that general statement of intent. An example, while I was on the board, a couple of times we passed resolutions stating our commitment to clean air. Here's a general statement, policy statement. Then we passed an ordinance that actually implemented that statement of policy by regulating when people can burn wood. So a little bit about the governing documents. Here's the who. We have a county chair. The chair is elected countywide. They are the chief executive officer of the county. They run the day-to-day operations of the county. All of the departments report to the chair. They have the sole authority to appoint department heads. There's a requirement for consent, but the chair appoints, and the chair has authority to direct all of the county employees. And importantly, the chair prepares and submits the county budget for board approval. So chair is the chief executive officer. The chair is also a member and the presiding officer of the Board of Commissioners. I think this has been so for some time at the county. It wasn't always so, and it isn't necessarily so, right? You could have a structure where the chair is the chief executive officer, but does not have a vote on the Board of County Commissioners. In fact, the city of Portland's newly adopted charter is essentially that structure where the mayor is the chief executive officer, does not sit on the county council. So that's the county chair. And then the Board of County Commissioners is the chair plus 4 commissioners, each of whom are elected by district. The Board of Commissioners approves the budget. Most of the actions of the Board of Commissioners is done with a majority vote. So that's approving the budget, approving appointment of department heads. So the chair appoints department heads, but the Board of Commissioners has the right and the responsibility to approve department heads, and approve ordinances and resolutions by majority vote. The only time there's not a majority vote, as there may be some smaller pieces, but a sort of a big responsibility where there's not just a majority vote, it takes a vote of 4 members to either create or abolish a new department. So that's the rough division. And you can think of it as analogous, again, looking at state government, which people I think are more accustomed to, analogous to the role of the governor and the legislature, right? The governor runs county agencies, the legislature passes policy. I will make one other note, though, about the space that counties, particularly in urbanized areas like ours, play, the space for policymaking. You've got the state legislature making policy, passing laws about matters of statewide concern. You have cities, and in our case, particularly the city of Portland, also the city of Gresham, that have primary jurisdiction, superseding jurisdiction over the matters that are within their purview. So permitting, zoning, space management within the city of Portland. These are all spaces where the city legislates and passes policy. And so as a practical matter, the space, even though earlier I showed you that broad statement of power over any matter of county concern, as a practical matter, the legislative space that the county occupies is primarily around public health. So if you were to look through our ordinances, I think and I didn't actually do the survey, I hope someone will and tell me if I'm wrong, but in general, the county's legislative actions tend to be in the space of public health. So think about clean air, think about tobacco, think about food cart regulation. That was a significant piece of work when food cart pods became a thing. All public health. So that's just in operation where the legislative actions tend to sit. All right, next slide. Oh, Dennis mentioned this, sheriff, district attorney, and auditor. They are independently elected officials, as Dennis mentioned, but their budgets sit within Multnomah County, and so there is budgetary authority. Quick touch on county charter review, which Melanie mentioned. The charter requires that every 6 years we create a charter review committee. The last one was impaneled in 2021 to 2022. They referred 7 charter changes to the ballot, 6 of which passed. The only one that did not pass was the second one on this list, which was extending voting rights to the limit of the law. And the next committee will be impaneled in March 27. And I want to mention this, without going too deep into it, to say that, again, participating in charter review processes requires understanding your county government to begin with. And so that's one of the many reasons why this panel is so important. So I was asked to touch a little bit on the relationship between the counties and cities and metro. If a person from the city or metro were here, they would have a lot more to say and put a lot more things on this list, but here's my list. And I selected just 2 areas to highlight because these are the spaces that have been in the public arena. And these are the spaces where at present, there's the most overlap with cities and metro. So, I think you can think of both homelessness and public safety as being on a continuum in terms of the ways governments act in those systems. So let's start with homelessness, right? There are several pieces to that continuum. Housing. Housing is the primary driver, or lack of affordable housing, the primary driver of homelessness. So housing is a piece of the continuum that sits under the Portland Housing Bureau and Metro in terms of developing housing. Shelter. At present, both the county and some cities, Portland, Gresham, a little bit, I think, operate shelter. As Dennis mentioned, it used to be that there was a bifurcated shelter system between Portland and Multnomah County, with Portland, by and large, running adult shelter, single male shelter, and county running women, families, and youth. It came together when we combined to form the what was then the Joint Office of Homeless Services. Over the past 2 or 3 years, it's started to be overlapping again, with the city actually running shelter to some extent. Services, primarily county, again, some services like outreach being conducted by the city right now. Space management, what I mean by that is rules around camping, rules around who and how public space can be occupied. This has been a topic of a lot of concern and effort. That is a city responsibility, ordinances around camping, for example. And then supportive housing services measure oversight. This really overlaps with the whole continuum. You will remember that you'll know that we passed a supportive housing services measure in 2020. The counties are responsible for implementing and using the revenue from that, but Metro has an oversight function. And then public safety, sort of a similar continuum. There are different pieces to the system, and different jurisdictions have responsibility and ownership of those different pieces. Policing, actual police force law enforcement within city limits, is the purview of the city. So Portland Police Bureau is the police law enforcement agency in Portland. Gresham has a police force. The sheriff is the law enforcement official in unincorporated Multnomah County. That's a part of the county that isn't part of a city. And the sheriff used to, at least 2 years ago, I haven't checked whether this is still true, the sheriff used to also provide contracted policing services to some of the smaller cities in East County. So we got policing, you got prosecution, that is the district attorney. The jails, as Dennis mentioned, the sheriff has responsibility for the jails, other than the juvenile detention center, which is the county's. And then community justice, that's the piece around keeping people out of jail, either once they've served their sentence or before they serve their sentence, parole and probation, preventing people from interacting with the criminal legal system in the first place. That's the county. So I just wanted to lay these examples out, because I think when we talk about the relationship with the cities and Metro, what you see is that if I were better at doing slides, I would have done a Venn diagram for these, right? These are Venn diagrams. We've got areas of overlap, we have areas of distinct responsibility, and they all connect. And I think managing those relationships because of those areas of overlap and those connections inevitably leads to disagreement and friction. And I raise that, I want to air that, because I think that's a question that I get a lot even now, as to how those relationships are managed. But that's, I guess I'll say one other thing. There are other areas where there are similar overlaps and connections. My observation has been, let's take transportation. We run bridges. Those bridges interconnect with roads that are run by the city of Portland. So got to work together with the city really closely. We actually work quite well with the city, the county rather, actually, when I was there, worked quite well with the city on transportation. My theory is because it wasn't as politicized as homelessness and public safety, right? We worked on the redo of the Burnside Bridge together. We had disagreement, but it really didn't spark the way these two substantive areas have sparked friction. And in my opinion, politicization, media attention, those sorts of things have a lot to do with why those relationships have been difficult over the past few years. I think that I hate to stop on that note, but that was my last slide. So I'm going to stop so that Jeff has time for his really important piece.
Well, Sushila, I think you haven't stopped, because there will be a lot of questions, I'm sure, on that overlap. But for now, let's move on to Jeff Renfro. Jeff is the county economist. Jeff, you're on.
Thank you for having me. I'm just going to jump right into it in the interest of time. So I'm going to talk about some of the same issues that Dennis and Commissioner Jayapal talked about, but kind of from the numbers perspective. So first of all, just some high-level context for the county's budget. So in total, we have about a $4 billion budget. The increase for the current year relative to fiscal year 2025, the year before, was only $42 million. That's actually quite a bit less than the annual increase we've seen in kind of the pandemic and post-pandemic years. In total, we have almost 5,900 FTE, which stands for full-time equivalent. We have over 6,000 employees. And when you add all the kind of temporary employees who do things like facilitate the elections, we have over 7,000 people who work for the county in one way or another. And then while I'm on this slide, before I move on to the other stuff, I'm going to draw a distinction that I'm going to come back to over and over. And that's the distinction between the county's general fund and then what I'll refer to as other funds. So if you're watching county briefings or watching the budget process, you'll notice that we're spending a lot of time talking about the general fund. The general fund is about 25% of our total budget. The reason we spend so much time on it is funded with local taxes, and it's almost completely discretionary. So it's the pot of money that our board has a lot of control over. It's what they use to respond to like emerging issues that come up. Pretty much the rest of our budget, the rest of the $3 billion or so, it's money that comes from other places for specific purposes. And we'll get into that, but really the board has like a lot less discretion and control over it. So if we move on, so in total, these are the categories of our revenue for our total budget. The biggest category right now for the last couple of years is what we call beginning working capital. Beginning working capital, all that means is it's the money that we had in previous years that we're rolling over to the new year. The reason that this is such a big category right now is it's where we keep a lot of our capital dollars. So any big capital project that is going to run for multiple years, like our library construction project that's happening right now. So voters approved a general obligation bond that's paying for the rebuilding of a bunch of library branches. They're really beautiful. If you haven't been to the newly reopened Albina Library, I'd recommend going as soon as possible. So we started with a big pot of money and we're spending it down as those projects are being built. Another big category of beginning working capital is in our Preschool for All project. We have what we describe as a dedicated savings bucket that we're setting aside to use in future years during a period of expected deficits. We can go into that later if people are interested. And then this is also where we keep things like our contingency funds, our reserves, things that hopefully we won't have to spend in any given year that we continue to roll over. Taxes are our second biggest category. Most of the tax revenue that we collect goes into the general fund. So property tax is the big one. We also have a business income tax and then a tax on motor vehicle rentals. It's kind of our big three in the general fund. The other big tax in this category is the Preschool for All tax, which is a local income tax on high income households to fund our Preschool for All program. The money from the Metro supportive housing is actually not in this category because from the perspective of the county, that money is a transfer from Metro. So Metro collects the tax, they transfer it to us. So it falls into our intergovernmental category, which is down there on the bottom. Intergovernmental is funding that we get from the federal government, the state, from Metro or from our government partners. Again, that is usually there to pay for specific things. It tends to fund a lot of our housing and human services system, but then also funds things like the maintenance of roads and kind of all that city planning stuff that happens in unincorporated Multnomah County that Dennis mentioned earlier. I'm just going to keep moving. So what do we spend the money on? So from a county-wide perspective, our biggest category is contractual services. And the best way to think about contractual services is it is us paying some outside organization to do work on the county's behalf. So a lot of the work that's done by the Department of County Human Services, by the Health Department, and by the Homeless Services Department, we're really selecting community providers that will pay to then go out and provide those services. So that's a lot of what's going on here. Our second biggest category is personnel. So personnel is the county paying its own employees to do work. Really, when we think about personnel and the importance of that as a driver for the year-over-year change in costs, many of the same drivers that are pushing up personnel costs also push up our contractual services, because when we're paying money to outside organizations, really what a lot of them are doing are then paying their employees to do the work. So some of the same cost pressures are working on both ends. Materials and supplies, I think, is relatively self-explanatory. And then internal services, that's the stuff that Dennis was talking about that our Department of County Assets does. So departments use a little bit of their budget to pay our internal services department to take care of the buildings, to take care of the IT, to make sure that the cars in our fleet are running. Keep moving. This is a history of what we've actually spent the money on. So a couple of things to draw your attention to. You'll see that personnel and contractual services have always been our biggest expense, but both of them have really kind of hit this inflection point, have been growing rapidly over the last couple of years. On the personnel side, that's due to an increase in the number of employees at the county. Just a few years ago, our full-time equivalent, or number of employees, was closer to 5,000. Now it's closer to 6,000 based on an expansion of funding for certain services. And then contractual services, a lot of what we're paying for in the Preschool for All program, and then with the Metro Supportive Housing money, is going to those outside organizations. So our payments to that has increased over time. Okay, so this is a breakdown of all of the departments that Dennis talked about and where they get their resources from. So I'm going to stop here just briefly and show you this. This corresponds to what you might find in our budget document, but this also includes some capital funding that kind of distorts this in any given year. This also excludes things like cash transfers. So that's transferring money in between funds, contingencies, and reserves. So this is something closer to what the county would actually expect to spend in any given year. But I'm going to go to the next one, show you a different version of that, which pulls out the capital funding. So this is closer to what our kind of ongoing programming by department is. So the thing I really want to draw your attention to here is, so the blue color is our general fund, the contribution of general fund to each of these departments. And as you look across, there's 3 departments where the blue makes up the majority of the bar. And that's the sheriff, our Department of Community Justice, which does our parole and probation, and our district attorney. So the public safety components of what we do is almost exclusively funded by the general fund. And in fact, about 50% of our general fund resources goes to public safety. That's been pretty stable over time. And one of the reasons for that is really there are all sorts of state and federal programs that are dedicated to the social safety net services. We say all the time that there just aren't a lot of people who want to pay us to operate a jail. So that public safety is kind of a core component of what we do with that discretionary general fund resource. And then our departments and our experts are working with our counterparts in other governments, or applying for grants and trying to find other funding sources for our health and human services and non-public safety programming. We still spend a significant amount of general fund on health and human services. So if you look on the left, the health department's total budget is almost $500 million. There's a really significant amount of general fund dedicated to that. It's just relative to the total size of their budget. It's a smaller piece of it. So I'm going to keep moving. These are just a breakout of our 3 voter initiatives that were approved in 2020. So the library construction bond, you'll see the spending on that goes down every year because we're completing projects, spending down the money that we receive from issuing these bonds. Preschool for All is in the middle. The green part on the bottom is what we're spending on those direct services, actually providing seats in the community. That's going up pretty quickly, and it's basically set to double every year over the next couple of years as the number of seats rapidly increases. That blue part in the middle, it's listed as unappropriated balance here. That is mostly what we call our dedicated savings, which we're saving now to spend down in the period between 2029 and kind of the mid-2030s, when we're expecting to have deficits that we'll need to offset. And then supportive housing is over there on the right. You see that rapid increase in the amount that we spent on programming, and then it coming down now as the SHS forecast and expectations around revenue has decreased. We also were able to, some of the underspending that we built up in the first few years, we kept rolling over and spent that on programming. A lot of that underspending that created that cushion it is gone now based on the amount that we've been pushing out in homeless services. So now we're kind of living within the limitations of our ongoing revenue there. Okay, so moving into the general fund, which again, this is where the board has almost total discretion about what they want to spend this on. So the biggest contribution, the biggest revenue source for the general fund are taxes. Property tax makes up about 2/3 of this. About a quarter of it is our business income tax, and then about 6% of it is our motor vehicle rental tax. Beginning working capital in the general fund, most of that is the general fund reserve that we have every year to make sure we have there as a kind of just sort of financial stability strategy in case we have an unexpected downturn in our revenues. Then what we spend the money on, over 60% of what we spend the general on is personnel. So personnel, again, is just paying county employees to do our work. And then contractual services, which on my screen, this is getting covered up. But about half of contractual services is going straight to our community partners who are then paying their employees to do work on behalf of the county. And then even internal services, a lot of that is paying our employees in the Department of County Assets to provide those services. So I think the easiest way to think about like what is the financial health or the financial trajectory of Multnomah County, really you just need to compare what is happening with property tax revenue growth to what's happening with the growth in our personnel costs. And we have a term that we use at the county. We call it our structural deficit. I'll go into property taxes a little bit more in a second, but based on the constitutional limitation of our property taxes, over time, we expect property tax to grow slower than our personnel costs. So our kind of normal state in the general fund is to be cutting, is to be in a state of deficit. And that can change during periods that can be offset or kind of masked. But over a long period of time, we expect our revenues to not keep up with our expenses. So we'll go into a little bit more about why that is. I'll say I'm going to try to do this in like 45 seconds, but the Oregon property tax system, it's complex, it's complicated, it's really hard to explain. We could spend 30 minutes on this and we'd probably still need more time. But the really short version of this is that there's multiple values that you need to know about in our property tax system. The value that a normal person cares about is real market value. So a real market value of a property is supposed to be close to what you could sell that property for on the market. The problem for us is that our taxes really aren't tied to real market value. So especially in the time that I've been the economist at the county, which is about 10 years, real market values in Multnomah County have increased rapidly. We've had years where especially residential properties have increased in value by 15, 16%. We have not seen a commensurate increase in our property tax revenue. And the reason for that is the other value that you have to know about in the property tax system is what's called maximum assessed value. And maximum assessed value is the 1996, 1997 value of a property minus 10%. And then it's allowed to grow by 3% every year. So imagine like a straight line just growing out forever, right? And so the value that we care about at the county for tax collection purposes is what's called assessed value. And assessed value is the lower of real market value and maximum assessed value. So before the pandemic, I never talked about maximum assessed value in public because I thought it was just another concept and something that was already complicated. The reason for that is for the vast majority of properties in Multnomah County, real market value is way higher than maximum assessed value. So in almost every case, assessed value was just equal to maximum assessed value. That meant it could only grow by 3% per year, which is the primary driver of why our property tax revenue does not keep up with our expenses. It's constrained by the Constitution. The issue that we're dealing with right now and is contributing to some of the deficits I'll talk about in a second is that some properties in the county, specifically office buildings downtown, and in some cases, very large, very high value properties in downtown, their market value or their real market value has gone down by 70 or 80% in some cases. So what's happening is that real market value line is crashing down through that maximum assessed value line, and it's pulling assessed value down with it. So it's pulling the property tax payment down with it. So for most of the properties in Multnomah County, we're kind of still in that world on the left, in which the problem we're dealing with is that property tax is growing really slowly. But then there's a concentration of some very high value properties where their property tax payment is actually declining. And it's creating kind of a drag on the overall growth in the system. So before the pandemic, I would have told you that if we'd had 3% or like 3.25% property tax growth in a given year, I would have said it's not enough for us to kind of keep up with what we think our ongoing obligations are. The property tax growth for the current year is only 2.4%. So we haven't seen a level of growth that low since basically right after the financial crisis. So it's taking a problem, like a problem we're constantly dealing with, and it's just making it even worse. Like I said, we could talk about this for so much longer, but I'm just going to move on, and I'd be happy to answer questions about it. Our second major revenue source in the general fund is what's called the business income tax. You'll hear us call it the BIT. The business income tax is a tax on net income for businesses that are operating within Multnomah County. So the easiest way to think about net income is that it's profits. And it's really tied to US corporate profits overall. So in any given year, about 10 companies are responsible for between 15 and 20% of these revenues. So I get a lot of questions about like hyper local economic conditions and what that's doing to BIT. From our perspective, what's going on Wall Street and like the profitability of big financial firms or like energy companies that are operating internationally, it's really a more important driver of these revenues. So this is a graph of US corporate profits in the US. You can see we're at an extremely high level right now. So that is masking some of our property tax woes right now. But there's been a lot of really concerning economic news, both locally and nationally lately. And so this is also our most volatile revenue source. So if there's an economic downturn, we could lose anywhere between 15 and 35% of our BIT basically just instantly in 1 year. So it is an important revenue source. It's something that we're kind of wary of and we have to be careful of just because you can't always count on it. So the last slide I'll show. This is our most recent general fund forecast. This is what I shared with the board in May. On November 6th, I'm going to give an update on this to our board. You can watch it on the county's YouTube channel. We'll go much more in depth to some of the issues that I've just lightly touched on now. But basically, when you put our revenues and our expenses together, you get that line that's down there on the bottom. So for fiscal year 2026, the current year, by law, we had to have a balanced budget. So that's why there's a zero there. For fiscal year 2027, our expectation is that we're still more or less balanced. The really big caveat there is that the majority of county employees have an open labor contract right now. The last time we had so many open labor contracts, it increased our ongoing expenses by about $18 million. So as of right this second, we think we'll be more or less balanced for the upcoming budget process. But between now and then, we're probably going to see an increase in our personnel expenses. And then again, due to the expectation that property tax revenue growth will continue to be pretty slow. And then the fact that even though inflation is doing a little bit better than it was during the pandemic, it's still higher than we need it to be by historic standards. Our expectation is that we're going to go through kind of a prolonged period of deficits that we're dealing with every year. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to move on to the question phase.
Thank you, Jeff, and all of our speakers. That was so informative. Unfortunately, we just have about a half an hour left, and we have so many questions. So while I feel we barely scratched the surface, we better get to those questions. As a reminder to our audience, if you have questions for the speakers, please put them in the Zoom chats. We will do the best to get them read out. I will ask our panelists to try and make your answers relatively short so that we can get to as many of these as possible. I'm going to start with Dennis. There was a question in the chat about residents in Multnomah County that are not Portland and not Gresham. We've heard complaints from residents of East County that they're not treated equitably with Portland residents. How does the county apportion its services across its various cities, excuse me, and unincorporated areas?
It's a great question. And I think it's one we haven't created a perfect answer for. I think we're still working to get to a better state there. I will say in recent years, it's been really encouraging. The homelessness services table has helped with this, but there are meetings now with our District 4 Commissioner, Commissioner Vince Jones-Dixon, his team, Commissioner Lori Stegman, who was in that office before, also started this work. And really they meet with city managers and city leaders from those other cities, and they talk about issues of importance. And I think as we think about how we spend our time, what we talk about, we're trying to uplift the issues in those communities more than we used to, build them into our board briefings, build them into our communications plans, and make sure that we're sending folks out into those communities. One example that I'm familiar with from Homeless Services, they hired an East County liaison who can work with those communities directly, make sure that we're putting services out there, being intentional about citing shelters, citing outreach programs, things like that. Those are things that we in the last few years have started doing a little bit better, but there is a lot more work to be done, and we're going to keep building that.
Thank you, Dennis. Here's a question for Jeff. Let's take a dive into the service funding topic that's been getting a lot of attention in our chat. One of them would be preschool for all. Could you briefly explain to us how preschool for all taxes are assessed and spent? It seems that this tax, which was approved by 2/3 of the voters in 2020, is now so controversial. Why is that? And are there any efforts being made to change the system?
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer questions about preschool for all. So just the basics. So it's a tax on high income households, an income tax on high income households for people living or working in Multnomah County. So it is 1.5% on income above $125,000 for single filers, or $200,000 for joint filers. And then there's an additional 1.5% on income above $250,000 for single filers, or $400,000 for joint filers, for a total of 3% on that upper category. And then the funding is restricted. So it has to fund our Preschool for All, which is our universal preschool program. So right now we're still in the implementation and build out phase. So the number of seats, we're expecting to provide 3,800 Preschool for All seats in the current year. That's going to increase, like I said, it's going to basically double over the next couple of years before we get to fully universal, which we think will happen when we're providing about 11,000 seats. Right now, that's expected to happen in 2030. Why is this so controversial? I think is a great question. No one likes paying taxes, so this is a new tax. I think it also was passed in November of 2020, right in the pandemic. So there's been a lot of changes that have happened in the community since then. So a lot of the questions that I get about the tax are, it's happened at the same time that we've seen a decrease in population and we've seen some economic stagnation. I think there are some people who believe that Preschool for All and that tax is contributing to that. I can tell you that I'm one of two people who have access to all of the tax returns. So there's a lot of discussion about what is happening to our payers. So I can just tell you, we have seen an increase in the total number of payers in each of the 3 years that we have full data for. At the high end, so basically due to income inequality kind of globally and in our community, the top 2.5% are responsible for about 50% of the revenue we collect in some years. So we've looked specifically at those people, and we've released information about this before, but on the very high end, we have lost some of those payers. Based on the tax information I get, I can't say exactly why they have stopped paying, but my assumption is that some of them have left the community. But overall, the amount of revenue that we're collecting continues to go along with our expectations for the program. I know I'm supposed to be brief, but I'll just touch on two more things really quickly. Another controversial thing is that the program is carrying like a pretty significant fund balance. And this was built into the plan that the voters voted for. So the idea behind the program has always been that we would increase the number of seats over time till we hit universal. Because of that, it creates this period where expenses in the program are expected to grow really rapidly. And it'll get to a point where our expenses will exceed our revenues. So we'll be running a deficit for like 7 or 8 years. So from the very beginning, we've implemented what we call our dedicated savings strategy, where we're taking the surplus from the money that we're collecting in the early years when we're still ramping the program up, we're saving it, and we're going to use that to offset those deficits. So we're kind of looking at the program from the whole implementation cycle rather than looking at any one year. And then finally, right now, so in the Preschool for All tax code, it requires the chair to convene a technical advisory group that will look at the tax. It will look at kind of economic conditions locally, and it will make recommendations to the board about any potential changes that need to be made. So that group is meeting right now. We met this afternoon. All of the information that board sees, all of the agendas, the presentations, these are public meetings. So anyone from the public can go to the Preschool for All Technical Advisory Group website. You can watch the meetings. I'll say the one this afternoon was fascinating, and we got really deep into population change and some demographic stuff locally, and dug into some economic data that I think is really important for context setting. So that group is due to deliver a set of recommendations to the board in the middle of February. And then our board will take that, and then we'll run a public process to consider any changes that need to be made to the program. So all that stuff is in process, and we'll be continuing to go for the next little bit.
Thanks, Jeff. So Sheila, let's turn to you. And speaking of changes, you had mentioned in your presentation that Multnomah County is about to launch its next charter review. The Portland Charter Review last time made major changes. Oddly, the Multnomah County Charter Review was at the same time, but people have very little memory of that. What structural changes do you believe are needed for this current upcoming charter review to be most effective? And what issues would you personally call out as being particularly important for that charter committee to review?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I separated into two things, as you did. One is the process itself, the process of charter review, and then what potential changes might be. In terms of the process, I think, as I alluded to at the beginning, the county in general has sort of flown under the radar in a lot of different ways until recently, until homelessness and public safety issues really bubbled up. And the same has been true for county charter review processes, especially last time when Portland was going through such a major process. I think there just wasn't capacity in the community, sort of took the oxygen out of the room. So I think this is an opportunity to do it differently. And what we have learned both by looking at the Portland process and looking at some other jurisdictions is charter reviews are really a chance for the community to get to know their government, right? It's a chance to get out there, educate people, engage people in their government. And so I think, I speak also for this group I've been leading to think about charter review. We're really going to recommend that it be a much broader process of community engagement, that the county, starting from recruitment of committee members, through thinking about charter changes, through voter education, really expand community outreach in order to use it not just to generate changes, but also to create this opportunity for civic engagement. So that's the process piece. And then, I'll say what we've heard from the last committee, there were a number of issues that the last charter change committee wanted to examine, but didn't have the time or the capacity to examine. And they left us a list, which is so useful. And from the interviews that we've started doing, there are a couple of things that bubble to the surface. One is looking at the structure and the relationship of the chair and the Board of County Commissioners. As I mentioned, not all counties, not all jurisdictions had this particular structure where the chair is both the chief executive officer and essentially the chief legislative officer. And that structure was pointed to by the last committee. They wanted to look at having a county manager, for example, having a chief operating officer embedded in code. Those are both ways to figure out how to separate functions, more clearly articulate functions, create more accountability. And so those types of questions, I think, will come up. And the other thing that I don't know that I have an opinion on it yet, but that has bubbled up in interviews has been looking at the size of the Board of County Commissioners. Now, I think that would create it could create a giant eye roll in some segments of the population. We've just went through the process of increasing the size of the city council by a lot. We now have 12 city councilors. I can imagine that folks will have raised similar questions again. But a number of people have mentioned that. And I think it's because we have had a board of five for a long period of time, during which the county's population has expanded. To your question, Melanie, about adequate representation of East Portland and East County, I think the number of commissioners that we have relates to that question. So the size of the county's population has grown, complexity has grown, and that's another issue that's bubbled up.
Thank you. That was very useful. We've had a number of questions about the overlap between the county and the city. I'm going to combine a couple of these questions, and I'm not sure who wants to answer this. One is more specific to homeless services. They say the county and Portland both try to service homeless people. How do they coordinate? And then another question I think that's very related to that is, where and how is the overall division of labor and budget between city and county decided? And thus, how can they be adjusted? Who wants to take that question?
I'd be happy to take the second part of it, and I think maybe Dennis can better address the first. So the second part, great question of where is it decided? It's a combination of things. Some of it is historical, and without doing a treatise on history of cities and counties, some of it really just has to do with how cities developed and how counties developed, and cities developed in order to provide infrastructure. So the most local of things was what cities were supposed to do. Counties were originally actually agencies of the state, and they were charged with elections. And you see the county still does elections, and they were charged with what was called, back in the early days, care for the needy. And so you see counties be social safety nets. So some of it is historical practice. And then I think in terms, and then other pieces have been what jurisdictions have chosen to pick up. So there is broad authority for counties, as I said, anything that's of county concern. Similarly, cities, anything that's of city concern. And so there's also been things that counties, I can speak better to that, have picked up over time that they didn't do at the beginning. How is it adjusted? Typically, when it's been tried in the past, historically, or when it's been done in the past, it's been by agreement between the jurisdictions. So intergovernmental agreements. We all alluded to the Joint Office of Homeless Services. That was an example. It was an agreement between the city and the county that there was going to be created this joint office with a joint governance structure and agreement around how that was going to be funded. That has changed since the office was created, but that was an IGA back in, I think it was the early 80s. It was before I was in Multnomah County, so I may not, yeah, Dennis is nodding. Early 80s, there was a similar agreement between the city and the county. On the county's end, it was a resolution, Resolution A, and it was an agreement in which the city and the county reapportioned a whole bunch of things. Won't go into detail about it, but that is typically how it's been done.
Maybe I'll jump to the next question then. I think that I'm going to hand this one over to Dennis. Because he didn't get to finish answering the previous question. But related to that was a question, especially for these overlapping programs, but for any, how is effectiveness measured for these programs?
It's a great question. So contract management is something that the Joint Office, Homeless Services Department has really had to build up in the last few years. They've needed to bring in staff to help with that. They've built different systems, a lot of checking in on the providers, setting clear terms and contracts and program instructions, doing on-site monitoring, making sure that that we actually have a data system that didn't exist, frankly, up until the last couple of years. So we actually have a by name list where we can see people as they move through the system. That didn't exist before. And so that's a key piece of it. And actually, what was heartening the last couple of years, our purchasing folks at the county, they help with contract enforcement and contract management. And they actually worked with the Homeless Services Department on some pilot programs to build up that infrastructure, those monitoring muscles. And what's happened is the Homeless Service Department has now become a model for other parts of the county for how to work with these providers to make sure they're holding things accountable. And folks might see some news stories here and there where there's been concerns raised about a shelter program. We had a village program, then it was in the Oregonian. Lambda Week reported on a family shelter program. And what you're seeing in those stories is they're not writing about an issue that we didn't know about. They're writing about an issue that we took action to look into. So that's beginning to change. It's taken maybe longer than people would have liked, fairly, but it's happening now, and that's a good thing. And I think we have to keep building that. And I think the better data systems that we're creating, the better tracking, real-time tools to see where people are, dashboards for the money. Now you can see every month the inflow and the outflow into homelessness. Those are really crucial things that are going to help us decide if we're spending our dollars in the right way and how we need to adjust. We're also working through a new set of key performance metrics. So with the city and county together, there's a homelessness response system that was created after the joint office sort of sunset and we had the homeless service department. City and county came together with this other system to have a table where they're going to set combined policy goals and work together. Gresham's part of that. The healthcare folks are part of that. And that's the other place where we can see if the numbers are moving, if we're bringing homelessness down, all of that. That's another place that we can hold people accountable.
So I think, thank you very much for that, Dennis. I think we have time for one very quick question, and I'm going to throw it over to Jeff. I'll do one that I think we can do fairly quickly, and it is, does the county invest cash with an intention of return? If not, how is cash held prior to disbursement?
Yeah, so we have a team, our treasury team, that works under our CFO, who are doing exactly this. So they're investing our funds kind of before they go out. And there's kind of a whole strategy around how to maximize the return on those investments while keeping our flexibility around cash flow that we need to make payroll. I will say that if you look at our returns, their work is really constrained by a combination of state law and board policy. So they're forced to be pretty conservative, but we are getting a return on investment on our funds that are just sitting, waiting to be spent.
Well, we've certainly gotten our return on our investment in you three speakers. So thank you very much. This has been very stimulating and enlightening discussion. I apologize to those in the audience who we didn't get time to get to your questions. I'll just say track these speakers down. You can ask them personally. And for now, I want to personally thank our league volunteer, Barbara Bird, who has been monitoring the chat. And of course, a very big thank you to our esteemed and very busy panelists for spending this evening answering our questions. Now I'll turn the microphone over to our league president, Audrey Zunkel-DeCoursey.
Thank you, panelists, for your excellent remarks. And we also appreciate the audience for those thoughtful questions that you put in the chat. We know that one panel can't address every facet of our county programs. We hope you gained some valuable insights tonight on how Multnomah County's government impacts its residents. And we hope you'll tune in again next month on November 5th for the second installment in our fall series about Multnomah County, doing a deep dive into untangling city and county services, specifically where they overlap in homelessness and behavioral health. If your question wasn't answered tonight, join us again and ask it of our next set of speakers. In November, we have speakers joining us from the city, the county, and some local providers. We want to give a special thanks to our volunteers for their help in bringing this webinar to you. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Ryan. We also want to thank our donors. Funding for this program is provided by donations to the League of Women Voters of Portland and from the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation. Thanks to Metro East for recording this webinar. The League of Women Voters is a membership organization. We thank our members for your generous volunteer and financial support for our educational programs like this. And as a reminder, you can join us. We welcome all our viewers to join the League. Membership and donor information can be found on our website at LWVPDX.org. Please tell your friends, family, colleagues to watch this video or listen to the podcast of this program, which will soon be available by next week at LWVPDX.org. And finally, but not less important, it is almost time for your ballots to arrive for the November 2025 election. I just got my little voters pamphlet today in the mail. So check out our website for information about the ballot measure in Portland and other voter information for other races. That's at LWVPDX.org or at vote411.org. Don't forget to vote. Thanks again to all of you. Have a great evening.